then walked into a bigger city in Nigeria, and she spread, this one person spread Ebola to like 4 or 5 different towns as she was moving through it.
That's gross.
Okay, how is this regional similar or different to its neighbors? Is there an ethnic group that's in this region that's different than others? Is there a different language, different customs? What are the different types of regions? This is what I want you guys to focus. There are formal regions that have exact boundaries. Think of Wyandotte County. You can literally walk to County Line Road, and that's the boundary between Wyandotte County and Johnson County, correct? You literally know that there's a boundary there. If you go far enough east, you'll hit State Line Road, right? And you'll know that there's a boundary between Kansas and Missouri, right? Define formal regions. Other regions aren't necessarily defined, but they are functional, which means there is a boundary to it, but it's there for a reason. I think of pizza delivery areas, the best example. My favorite pizza place in all Kansas City is at 75th and Warnell. It's called Waldo Pizza. It's my favorite pizza in Kansas City. I live in Lenexa. If I called Waldo Pizza and asked them to deliver, would they deliver to me?
No.
They would probably laugh and then hang up. They have a defined, or they have a functional region. There's an area they just will not drive to, right? That makes up a region of their delivery area that, while it's not an exact boundary, there's a point where it is a boundary. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily defined, but it is defined. It's like, because of the way they do things. When Jimmy John's opened up by my house, we called them one day when they first opened and said, hey, you delivered us? And I gave them my address. And they're like, the guy looks and goes, I'm looking at a map. He goes, you're just outside our delivery range. He goes, if you're a couple blocks east, you'd be good to go. So I was like, I could not get Jimmy John's for the longest time. That day I was too lazy to even drive there. So we called Mr. Good Sense and they delivered, which is not nearly as good as Jimmy John's.
You're just an inch off of our boundary, so we can't deliver to you.
Yeah, I guess I could have walked down the block and just stood there, but I was too lazy to get up.
I'm standing right in front of this house, you know. I mean, so deliver it here for me.
Can you deliver it by the way?
I will say that the first Jimmy John's in Kansas City was down off of Westport Road, and I lived at the time in an apartment that was close to it, but they didn't deliver right to my block, so I did walk down the street and have them bring it to me. So I didn't want.
That's what I would do.
Because the apartment I lived in at the time, there weren't that many parking spots, and I wasn't going to drive to Jimmy John's and give up my parking spot. So I literally walked like a block down the street and stood there, and I saw the Jimmy John's guy here. What's a vernacular region? That's a region that has not exactly boundaries, but it's perception, people's perception. You can look at it as big regions or small regions. Does Turner itself, the neighborhood Turner, the school district has defined boundaries, but the neighborhood itself, it kind of blends into other neighborhoods, right? Where Turner ends and Western Wyandotte is, yeah, there's a school district, right? But there's some people that might not go to Turner High School that might say, I live in kind of Turner neighborhood. Conversely, where does Rosedale end and Argentine begin? There's not like an exact road. I mean, you can kind of say Turner and Argentine, there's like 635 or kind of that area, more or less. But you can't get an exact street where Argentine and Rosedale kind of start and end, right? You can go by the middle schools, right? But not a defined region. Some people might say they on one street say live in Rosedale, and next street over they live in Argentine, but it might just be what they want to live in, you know. So you could also look at it at a bigger point as the Midwest, and this is the best example. Do we live in the Midwest?
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
No.
We in Kansas think we live in the Midwest. Does everyone in the United States think that we're in the Midwest?
Probably
No,
not.
not people that are actually in the West or East.
There was a huge survey done last fall by a company called Pew Research. Pew Research is the ones that do the polls for like presidential polls or voting polls. So they're like the most well-known survey company in the world. And they did a survey because they were curious what region each Americans thought they were in. So they surveyed 3,000 Americans, gave them a map of the United States, just as such, and said, can you circle all the states that are part of the Midwest? About 90% of those people surveyed circled Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio on those surveyed. So those were definitely Midwestern states. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Iowa was like 89%. So those 4 states were definitely Midwestern states. Would we all agree those are Midwestern states?
Yeah.
Kansas, about 50% of those 3,000 said Kansas was in the Midwest.
Oh, we're not.
Pennsylvania actually was considered part of the Midwest more than Kansas. We in Kansas would consider Pennsylvania as the East Coast, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Wait.
But according to people on the East Coast, they thought Pennsylvania was the Midwest. Missouri, and this is a funny one, Missouri actually had a lower percentage of being considered part of the Midwest than Kansas, even though to get to the rest of the Midwest, you have to go to Missouri, through Missouri to get to the rest of the Midwest, right?
Yeah, that's what
So they came back and did another survey of the people that they gave them the area that they defined as the Midwest and said, what are those states surrounding? What regions? 50% of people that said Kansas was not in the Midwest said that Kansas was in the South.
What?
The other 50% said that Kansas was in the West. Missouri, and this was the weirdest one, in Kansas, over 90% of people that in Kansas said they were part of the Midwest. The other 10% said they were part of the South, which might be like someone like southern Kansas might think they're like southern, I don't know. In Missouri, 70% of Missourians said they were in the Midwest. The other 30%, that's a pretty significant, said they were from the South. If you're in southern Missouri, you kind of think you're southern. But if you're in like Kansas City, Missouri, you definitely think you're in the Midwest, right? So a vernacular region is defined by people's perceptions. What we perceive as the Midwest, to us, some people think we're from the South. Conversely, who thinks Oklahoma is part of the South? Oh, no one in here. I kind of think that, but you ask people in Oklahoma, they say they're mostly in the Midwest. I would kind of say Oklahoma's the South myself, but people in Oklahoma think they're in the Midwest. It's all perspective.
So are we in like Midwest? Since we're not, are we in the
Can we just
Midwest?
be
Well,
in the middle? That'll be so much easier.
Technically.
If you go by sociology, like people that call the Midwest, Kansas is usually part of it. But again, it's a vernacular region. It's all perspective. Here's another vernacular region is accents.
Hello.
American English has a lot of different varieties to it. Most regions have a slight accent. However, there's a small part of the country that has perfect American English without any accents. We actually are in the small portion of the United States that have no accent. We are in the small region known as non-regional dialect American English. It goes from basically Topeka east along the basically I-70, about 50 miles to 60 miles north and south of I-70 across Missouri, excluding St. Louis, because there's a St. Louis accent, into Illinois, central Indiana, and then southern Florida is the region of the United States that have no accent. So you guys are in a small portion of the United States that has no regional dialect. Well, it's kind of interesting. If you ever watch the news, newscasters sound exactly like us, right? Yeah. Newscasters practice non-regional dialect. Many newscasters, if you talk to them regularly, if they're off camera, they'll have an accent from where they're from, but on camera, they'll talk like us. Oh, yeah. Particularly the people from the South, like if they work at like Dallas station, they're probably from Dallas, but it's expected to have a non-regional dialect. So you guys are in a unique position, as I am. You could move to any part of the United States, and you could say you're from anywhere, and they would probably believe you. There's no way to determine where you're from. It's kind of crazy. We have absolutely no accent. If you go west of Topeka or south of Wichita, there's a Kansas twang.
Twang?
That's what it's called, a twang. We don't have it. However, if you're from like Wichita originally, or your family is, you might have a little twang. We are in a non-regional dialect. Isn't that weird that we have no accent? We have perfect American English. Yes. Linguists, people that study language, think it's because of the most people that live in Kansas, this region, came from another city, and cities don't have as much accents as rural areas. And they're typically not from here for more than a generation or two, and just ended up working out that way. So I think it's weird that we don't have an accent.